Thank you so much. So, who am I? What do I do? I'm so sorry if you guys can hear any of the sound in the background. I do apologize about that. So sorry. So sorry about that. But my name is Crystal. I work as an IT security analyst at CISO Global out here in Scottsdale, Arizona. I worked for help desk for a couple of years. I also did system engineering and IT security as of right now. I also did graduate from Grand Canyon University. Go Lopes or Lopes Up for anybody who did go to GCU. It's a whole thing. Trust me, it's kind of crazy. But also, I run DEF CON 602, and I'm best buds with DEF CON 480 and 801. I've gotten to see a lot of their wonderful projects, and thank you so much to my friends who work over there. They've done some amazing jobs and some amazing projects. If you ever get a chance to, DC 801, the Badge Project, fantastic. Take a look if you can. But today we're going to go over what is Active Directory and why do we use it, and the misconfigurations that happen sometimes when we talk about Active Directory. Active Directory is basically a directory system that we use for online use and for basic use for anything that we have. Active Directory has a bunch of different uses, whether that be assigning out permissions or resetting passwords, sorting by departments, distribution lists, things like that. Normal help desk stuff would be, resetting passwords when customers call in. System engineers would use it in order to give permissions or assign file shares and things like that. IT security would be looking into login logs and integrating with Entra or anything that would deal with cloud or anything really deal with lateral movement or going forward with anything that would go there. So there's a couple of different things based on your job role that Active Directory does. But Active Directory has also been around since the early 2000s, very early on. So it is a legacy software. It has been around for so many years. It's been updated over those years. It's a wonderful software that we do use, and it is scalable and very reliable on certain parts. So it is great, but it also has its downfalls in some ways that we kind of want to talk about going forward. So what is Active Directory misconfigurations? Some of the common ones that you will see are lack of adequate protections for local administrative accounts, basically not having protection for those accounts that we would see that have those elevated accesses. If anybody's able to log in with those admin creds, what can happen? What would happen past there? What do we see? What do we have that could be an issue going forward with those admin accounts? You're basically getting God access, as we would say sometimes. And it could be a huge issue that can lead to ransomware being installed on random machines, or information being taken away from Active Directory, but also broken security barriers on premises and in cloud administration, adhering to least privileged account models. Like, are we practicing least privilege? Are we giving users the least amount of privilege possible in order to do their jobs? That is something that we need to look at. Are we giving them the most privilege, and somebody in the HR department has access to the finance department? That could be a huge issue. That is something that we need to talk about, and it's something that is a complete and utter issue that could be a problem. Who has access to those file shares, and who has access to anything going forward? Also, legacy authentication protocols. Do we have old authentication protocols in place? Do we need to update those? Is multi-factor authentication enabled? And how can we make sure that our users are safe and somebody isn't pretending to be them when they're logging in, making it look legit? That could be a huge issue. Also, insecure AD configurations. Is DNS secure? Are we making sure that there aren't gaps that we're missing that cyber criminals can take over? Things that can be initial access to lateral movement. We want to make sure that we're taking care of those things as IT professionals and making sure that we think the way that cyber criminals think in order to mitigate those chances of attack. We want to make sure that we take care of those. But not fixing those issues can have devastating impacts on not only the company, but the users too. It can be devastating in terms of public appearance or costly. We can have a bunch of different things happen in terms of money being sent out to foreign investors that we would never ever do, or in terms of, breaking the law. Did we not adhere to cyber law and now we have to pay tons of money in order to fix that? We have to hire outside resources in order to come and fix things that should have been fixed. So those are some things that we want to talk about. So is Active Directory safe? That's one thing we want to talk about. In a short answer, yes, but only when configured properly and only when we make sure that we take the steps in order to make those systems secure. Anything could be insecure if we don't do it properly. So we want to make sure that we do everything properly. One of the things that we talk about also is Active Directory is a legacy software. And even though it is a legacy software, about 90% of Fortune 1000 companies still use it to this day. That's kind of crazy if you think about it. It's kind of insane thinking about how many Fortune 1000 companies still use Active Directory. It's a lot. That's a lot of people and a lot of big companies. This makes Active Directory a huge target for cyber criminals, basically making them a bigger target due to their finance or their status. It could be a huge issue that we can look at in terms of, okay, are systems secure? Are we sure that we are not going to get hacked tomorrow? Or if we are going to get hacked, what are we doing in order to mitigate it? Do we have plans in place in order to make sure that we're okay? One big issue is when companies do grow, which it does happen and is a great thing and it's wonderful to see that. But are you taking the steps in order to make sure that company grows with its Active Directory system? Are you taking precautions and mitigating attacks that could have been prevented? Such as, are we having complex password policies in place? Are we making sure that, users only have least privilege access? Things like that. We want to make sure that we also terminate employees that have been terminated and make sure that we don't have active employees, terminating access, having those accounts taking over. There can be a lot of different things that we can make sure. But as a whole, file access, security, forced configuration, multi-factor authentication, those are a couple of things that we want to look at in terms of making sure our Active Directory systems are secure. One issue that comes up from these changes also is, are we also cleaning house? Just like you clean up your house on a normal week or a day-to-day basis, do we clean up our Active Directory systems? Do we audit what users have access? Do we look at, does HR have access to finance? Does anybody outside of IT have administrative access? And who is able to reach what files, who is able to download software, who is able to connect users to a domain controller? Those are things that we have to look at. We have to make sure that that's not an issue going forward. AD is known to be one of the weakest points in our cyber defense. So we want to beef it up as much as we can and make sure we take those steps in order to mitigate any chances of attack. Speaking of attacks, as this wonderful photo can definitely convey, there are different attacks. We have two slides for this one, but as SpongeBob is clearly showing, fire as a whole. Password spraying, brute force, and curb roasting are three that we have up right now. Basically, password spraying is using common passwords in an attempt to access several accounts on one single domain. Criminals can use hundreds of different passwords that they find or just known passwords. Some of the common ones are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, password 1, just to be kind of general with the passwords that they would use. And sometimes they can get a lot of different accounts. because of those password policies are not in place. Is your password policy complex? Is it making sure that it is, not using a very common password, or does it have, numbers and different symbols and different combinations of different letters? What is your password policy? And then the next one is brute force, where it's using data in order to crack a combination or crack the system in a general sense. It's like breaking into a safe, basically using data in order to get in a multitude of different ways. Breaking into a safe, using, you would see normally in a movie, somebody has the one like little headset thing that the doctors use that I can't remember the name of because, 3 cups of coffee is really going for me right now. But using that in order to listen to different ticks until it eventually opens up. That's something that we want to kind of avoid and make sure we have other policies in place to avoid that. Next with that is Kerber roasting, basically post-exploit attack, where criminals can attempt to obtain password hashes or credential hashes on Active Directory and use an attribute called the service principal name, or SPN for short, which is an attribute that will ties a service account with an ID. And essentially what we have to do with this one is a domain user actually requests a Kerberos ticket for SPN. They gain a Kerberos ticket, which is encrypted with a hash of a service account or credentials associated with SPN. Usually, a lot of times, the account is already taken over by either social engineering or getting a leaked password. So in order to actually request a Kerberos ticket, they would actually have to already have access to an account in order to make that Kerberos ticket. But once they get that Kerberos ticket and the SPN, basically they would brute force the credentials, sometimes in different ways, but essentially getting a plain text password for the service account, which is then, the adversary can impersonate the user and inherit access to the systems, machines, networks, or any granted access that user account has to a compromised account. So Kerberos attacks do not require domain account or accounts that have elevated privileges. Kerberosing requires that the attack to have existing access to a user account in order to request Kerberos tickets from KDC. Getting access to a user account can be done through social engineering, malware, or buying credentials from the dark web. So those are a couple of things that we want to take a look at and make sure. SPN can be leaked to either a host-based or domain user account. So that's kind of a little bit about those three, but we can go on to the next one, which also has the wonderful gift of SpongeBob running around screaming. Pass the ticket. That is another one that we can kind of look at and make sure that we kind of look into a little bit more. An attacker enables the attack enables a attacker or a criminal in order to steal Kerberos tickets or TGT to gain unauthorized access. Basically, social engineer or an example of this would be a social engineer trying to break into a bank using a stolen badge that a bank employee has actually had. And one of the greatest examples is probably Jason Street. Let's be honest, Jason Street has done this quite a few times. So if you've ever seen Jason Street, this is probably what you're talking about. But essentially just using somebody else's credentials in order to break in, whether they're stolen, and gaining access. Then we also have desync. That's another thing that we want to talk about. And these are just top 5. There's tons of different ones that we can go into, but I just wanted to focus on 5 for today, just to kind of look into these ones and kind of look into. But these this kind of attack is actually pretending to replicate or copy a process that Active Directory or domain controllers actually do to share information back and forth. This is usually meant for two users or two domain controllers, basically talking back and forth. Basically, it would be like kind of somebody eavesdropping on another department or pretending to work for that department and listening in order to gain information, even though they didn't work for that department or didn't work in that company at all. So that's a little example. I hope that helps with kind of understanding what desync kind of does. But this can be absolutely detrimental. We want to make sure that we are able to look into these and see if tickets come in or any lateral movement may come through. So one thing I kind of wanted to show a little bit is a little bit of the Active Directory attack path. Essentially, this is what an attack path would look like, at least from the outside view. Basically, Joel, a user who has been phished to look like, or at least look like Joel, is calling into the help desk, trying to get access to a members of, which tier 2 then, or help desk then escalates up to tier 2, which was a member of another group, as they would say. The local admin in tier 2 would actually say that, oh yeah, no, this user is going to gain access. They're going to go ahead and give privileges to Joel and basically make Joel a system administrator or a domain controller. So it would go from Joel asking for access, and then help desk accepting that request, sending it off to tier 2. Tier 2 basically thinking that tier 1 or help desk has actually taken the steps in order to mitigate this, passes it on and says, you know what, since I trust you, let's go ahead and get him access. Let's send it over, gets him the access. And now Joel, or somebody who pretends to be Joel, is now a domain controller or a domain admin. He's not a controller, but he's an admin. So now Joel has tons of different access in order to add, edit, or even delete certain things in Active Directory, which is not what we want. And we can make sure that they are taken care of, and by talking to one another and making sure that we communicate that Joel should have never had access. So that's one thing we can talk about. So are these attacks effective as a whole? Yes, they are very effective, and we can look into different things that they, whether they're being touched on different domain controllers or whether phishing attacks do end up happening, they are effective. One survey by Frost and Sullivan actually said that 50% of organizations experience AD attacks in the last 2 years, and 40% of those attacks were actually very successful. So as a whole, those attacks are very successful and can lead to compromise. So we want to make sure that we're constantly looking through our logs and making sure that even if we're, even if on a day-to-day basis, okay, does this look like somebody we know? Does this, is this actually the user? Is this coming from an IP address that we recognize for said user? And if not, we reach out to the user and we make sure that the user knows, like, hey, we've seen this. Is this you? No, you're not living in Maryland and exactly 2 minutes away from my desk. Okay, cool. Let me go ahead and reset your password really quick. And let me go ahead and just get you all set to go. So let's go there. Also, another study by IBM on their cost of data breach report of 2021 stated that the breaches actually were due to compromised credentials, took an average of 250 days in order to detect. That's quite a bit in order for those different attacks to come in. That is, or at least to detect it. That's a long time. That's almost a whole year before you're able to detect if a user has been compromised or if somebody's acting as that user. So it's like, yeah, okay, Max, that's great and all, but I don't know if this has actually ever happened in real life. Like, has this actually had any detriments to any actual companies? Do we look at any issues or any recent attacks that have happened? Well, Now that you say that, yeah. Actually, as of 2023, December 2023, Japan's actual space exploration agency, also known as JAGX or JAXA, reported that it had several cyber incidences, some coming from Active Directory. It breached their own Active Directory system for the Japanese space exploration system. And tons of information was leaked to the dark web, and there were, nations, state actors that actually might have been after that information this entire time, which is terrifying to think about. How did they get this information? How did they get in? Why did they attack Active Directory? Well, as we saw in the previous ones, Active Directory is a great source of information. It's also great for credentials. It's a fantastic way in order to get information and info that you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. Also with that, November 2023, we're looking at, a San Francisco-based company that ended up getting compromised as well, and a downloadable report containing all their information, such as names, email addresses, customer support systems. The company said in their emails to routers that there were customers that were notified about the breach, and actually along with this, that they had been compromised, and there was a downloadable file that they could download themselves or anybody else in order to get their data. That is horrifying to think about. Imagine that your data is now on the web for anybody to download. And how do you trace that? Well, you can't really. You could try, but there's no definite way in order to make sure that you can get your data secured. And then also in December of 2020, we also had SolarWinds. Everybody remembers that wonderful SolarWinds breach that everybody was panicking about back in the day. Their network and infrastructure were infiltrated. They were leading to compromise on their own platforms for Orion. Basically, the attackers got access and were distributing malware on their own updates to users. And a lot of companies were compromised, unfortunately, due to these pushes. Imagine you wake up one morning, you see SolarWinds patch, you update it because, we're making sure we're safe, we're making sure we're secure, and then notice something that all of your systems are down. Okay, well, what's going on? Let me reach out to SolarWinds. Let me see what's going on. Okay, we've been compromised. That had malware in it. Why did that have malware in it? Well, SolarWinds got compromised and pushed that, criminals pushed malware in the updates. That's horrifying to think about. It's terrifying. And as a whole, we want to make sure that we test those updates before they get pushed out. In one instance, one terrifying instance, which wasn't a compromise, but we should probably talk about, is the most recent one, which was CrowdStrike. Love CrowdStrike. They're a wonderful company. But you can see how fast everything went down, and especially a company like CrowdStrike. It wasn't a compromise, but it was essentially a push that did end up having everybody go down at the same time. It's terrifying to think of how many systems go down when a compromise is happening, but I think with that CrowdStrike incident, basically we did see that there are ways that people can go down, and how terrifying it can be when companies don't manage their patches or make sure they are secure. That is one thing we want to look at. So how do you know if you're compromised? Well, there's a couple of different things that we can look at of why or how you can tell if you're compromised. You can see if your print spooler service is enabled on a domain controller. It should never be enabled. And if you know it's enabled, go to your systems right now and disable it. Please. I would appreciate it. And I think your company would too. Also, normal users adding computer accounts to your domain, that can be one indicator as well. Anonymous access to AD or Active Directory enabled. We want to know who is accessing Active Directory. We want to have those logs. We want to know who is getting into our systems. We don't want Joe Smo from down the street in order to access Active Directory. We also don't even know if or who is accessing it from inside the country or outside the country, and or outside and inside the organization. We could have threat actors. We could have people who are just touching your AD and making changes and you wouldn't even know. We also want to talk about NTFRS or sysvol replication, and is that happening or is it being replicated, which it shouldn't be, and we want to make sure that does not happen. Also, unsecured DNS configuration. Is DNS secured enough to handle an attack? Does it have vulnerabilities? Do we have patches? Do we have anything that could be going forward? Also non-admin users creating Entra IDs. Normal users should not be able to create or edit certain parts of Active Directory or any part of Entra at all. So why are these users editing certain parts? What are they doing? How are they getting in? Who is doing this? And do they have the knowledge or the capability in order to know what they're doing? But they shouldn't also have access to this because they shouldn't be doing this as a whole. Also, built-in domain accounts being used within the last 2 weeks. We try to terminate those or turn them offline. We want to make sure those built-in administrator accounts are disabled as a whole, but also we know who is using those domain accounts if we are going to be using them. We constantly talk internally as long as externally to our own departments and make sure we have that communication to other departments going forward. But domain accounts should be, domain and administrator accounts should only be internal to IT and also the users that use it within IT. Changes to any privileged group memberships within the last 7 days that are not documented or not, have, tickets going forward. We want to make sure that, there are user accounts that do not have access, or people that do not have access to certain privileged accounts. If you have, administrator access or group policy or group membership for administrative accounts, we're going to make sure that Lindsay in, finance does not have that group access. She should not have that group access. What is she downloading? I remember quite a few days ago, I got a ticket actually in for one of our clients, and it asked for No Man's Sky on Steam to be downloaded. Funny enough, this was it was just one of those funny things that I like to just look at and I'm like, huh, somebody really requested that. Okay. They say work is also fun and play, but also should be that too. I don't know. I love No Man's Sky and I love gaming, but I don't know if I put it on my work computer. Just doesn't seem secure enough, just as a whole. But also enabled admin accounts that were previously inactive. We want to make sure those accounts are inactive. If an admin account was previously compromised and we disabled that account and now it's showing up as active, what happened in order to make that account active again? Are they doing testing? Who's reaching out to who's making, sure this account should have been turned off? Why is this account come back on? We need to talk within our group. And then if nobody knows, we need to deactivate it again. And we need to look at logs and see what happened in order to get that account active again. Who is downloading what's going on? Somebody grab the logs from, Microsoft admin and make sure that it's turned off. Also, along with that, suspicious admin logs from unforeseen IP addresses. We want to make sure that, if we are on a VPN or, outside the country or, traveling, those admin accounts are, talked about, or, hey, I'm going to be going here. Hey, I'm going to be, leaving to here. And this should be around the IP address that you should see for my admin account. Or, hey, I did do that. This is my admin account and somebody's using it in Maryland and I live all the way in Arizona. I never use that account and somebody's downloading this on this computer. Can we go ahead and take a look at that? We want to make sure we take a look into all those different things going forward. So if there's all these issues that we talked about, why do we even use Active Directory? Well, there's a couple of different things, you know. There's security, centralized management, group policy management, ease resource sharing, so being able to share resources very quickly, faster troubleshooting, a lot of documentation that comes out, you know, integration with Microsoft ecosystems. Ooh, very fancy, very, very fancy. And user management. So with the first one, security, you're able to see logs and different things that you wouldn't really normally be able to see. I know with Entra IDs, you're able to go into Entra and actually look at, you know, a user account and see, you know, where do they log in from? Here's the IP address, you know, what that user did and how it affected, you know, the ecosystem as a whole. There's also centralized management, and along with that, let me go back to security really quick. Also, another thing is you can actually disassociate certain devices with Entra ID accounts, which is really cool. That's also another cool thing that you can do. I don't know if anybody ever talked about that, but it's really fun. I really love doing that. Also, another thing, centralized management and group policy management. You are able to manage a lot of different resources very easily within Active Directory and actually, you know, assign permissions, edit permissions, take, you know, delete permissions, or, you know, create certain files and shares and things that people are able to use. And it is really good for easy resource sharing as well. You're able to share internally, but you're also able to log in from different devices and share those resources. I personally am a big fan of sharing out resources and working from home. It's great, but also it does come with some issues every now and again, but as a whole, it is very, very easy and very seamless sometimes. Faster troubleshooting, that's also another thing. A lot of people know Microsoft, and especially admins who have been working in Active Directory for the last 24 years. It has a lot of documentation. We're able to know, okay, based off of this specific thing that's going on and this specific code that I got, I'm able to do X, Y, and Z in order to troubleshoot it. Oh, my account is disabled. Okay, let me go to Active Directory, go to my account, and then go underneath user and actually see if my account is disabled or if I need to reset my password. That is another thing that we need to look. Or am I locked out? That's another issue that we can look into. Oh, I'm locked out. Okay, can you go ahead and click this, you know, button to unlock me, apply it, and then the next time the user logs in, have them reset their password. That's another thing we can talk about. And then also the integration with other Microsoft products, which is really great, you know, Entra IDs and things like that, but also all the different Microsoft products that come with, you know, being part of Microsoft, the licensings and, you know, account resets, and also the admin centers, you know, the admin center with Microsoft, which is fantastic. It's great. And user management, being able to move different users, create and duplicate different users based off of their accesses. So if you have, let's say, a user, for example, that you want them to copy the same everything, just everything, there's the same department, same location, they need the same shares, they need the same access as that user, you can actually copy that user and then make that account, which is really fast and easy versus actually assigning every individual account or every individual thing or security group that they would need. It saves a lot of time and it's very effective, especially if you're creating hundreds, if not thousands of users based off of that one or 20 different things. It's really great and easy. So how do we address misconfigurations and what do we do? So one thing is, I know that we talk about a bunch of different passwords or password policy complexity, but it is the heart of IT. Password complexity is absolutely top tier. in terms of what we need from an organization and how to make sure that users are secure. We want to make sure that, you know, our passwords are lengthy, they're complex, and they're ready to go. Making sure that all unnecessary open ports are closed, whether we don't really keep everything open, that's how we get hit. You know, disabling guest accounts. We do not need guest accounts on the network. We do not need them unless they're absolutely necessary and have documentation as to who is getting in and why they're getting in. And even still, they should only be used for a very small amount of time if used, and then disabled immediately right after they're done being used. You know, locking down permissions, making sure we're using the least amount of privilege for those user accounts, the most amount of privilege to do their jobs, but the least amount in terms of access. So that's one thing we want to talk about. Removing unauthorized access. That's another thing as well. They should not have access. Also, I want to apologize really quick. I know that this slide actually has one slide one missing. It was supposed to be using multi-factor authentication. So just a heads up, just in case anybody was wondering. Did a little patching on that, so should have fixed that, but it's okay. But also we want to talk about providing a regular patching, updating, you know, making sure that, you know, software's up to date, OS is up to date, firmware is up to date. You know, are we checking patch Tuesday? Are we looking at, you know, Wednesday, the following day after Tuesday, which is, you know, what everybody knows. But are we looking at Compromise Wednesday and making sure that we're not part of that group? You know, who's getting hit? You know, what do we need to patch? What do we miss? What is there? You know, things like that. Implementing application allow lists. You know, what applications are allowed, which ones aren't. You know, based off of that list. Just knowing what, you know, software needs to be in, what software needs to be out. We don't need to have everything on there, but we need to make sure that we mitigate those risks. Another thing is using context-based adaptive access controls and monitoring security incidences and events, making sure that we have those tickets going through if we see lateral movement or anything that might be even suspicious, or, you know, suspicious logins like that. We're mitigating those. We're on top of those. We're making sure that IT security and system engineers are aware of those issues going forward. Is IT security pushing those issues out fast enough? Are system engineers reaching out to those users to say, hey, you need to reset your password. Somebody tried to log in as you to another state. Oh no, somebody's downloading ransomware on your computer. Let's get on top of that. Let's block that, let's block that software on, so let's make sure that we're good on that end. But also making sure that we test patches as well. We want to make sure that, if there is a bad patch, that we do not set it out, but we want to test it as fast as possible within a good amount of time in order to make sure that, we're secure. So it's a little bit of test it, but also put it out. Those are two things that we kind of want to have hand in hand. And also hardening up your domain controller. So that way we're ready for attacks, making sure that we're not vulnerable. Along with that, of how to stop certain compromises or misconfigurations as well is, removing print spoolers onto domain controllers, which I did talk about previously, but I did want to bring it up since it is important. Stopping normal users from adding computers, again, talked about that previously, and securing DNS, which is also extremely important. And just monitoring accounts and activity that we see, making sure that we see those users and whether they're logging in, normally, or whether it's from a different IP address, or whether those, accounts are compromised. We take action as soon as possible, making sure we are secure and safe on those policies. Are we okay? Are we, taking care of our customers as well as possible? And making sure that we are safe as a whole. Do we make sure that everybody has access to the resources that they need, but also in a time that we can look at it and go, okay, timely manner, it's secure, it's accessible, it's perfect. That's exactly what we need. It's just the normal that we should look at. But also, we need to recognize irregular patterns. Okay, this user is logging in from a little bit of a different IP address, but they're doing a couple of things that are a little bit suspicious. Why is this person accessing the share file that they haven't accessed in like 6 years? Why are they getting into, HR files? Why are they getting into C-suite account? What's going on, and do we have information and access in order to look into that? Just making sure that we can leverage those different resources in order to see what users are doing. Just making sure overall. But in conclusion, I want to kind of talk about misconfigurations can happen over time. And no admin's going to be perfect. No engineer's going to be perfect. But what we can do is we can go ahead and take over and test frequently, audit often, make sure that we're ready for an attack, take the steps in order to secure Active Directory and communicate internally, making sure that we're all good to go whenever we have any issues with our environment. We're going to make sure that we're talking with our team, testing, and checking for unusual activity. We want to talk, make sure, but we also want to be secure as well. Lastly, for any additional information or talks that I would recommend, I did pull up some DEF CON talks from the last couple of years. DEF CON 24 Beyond MSCE with Red Teaming Active Directory, which is a really good talk. I love this talk. It's actually a really good one. Also, Exploiting Active Directory Administrative Insecurities, and also DEF CON 27, which is the Race of Minimal Rights in ACE for Active Directory Dominance. These talks are absolutely fantastic, and I've actually gotten to see 2 of these live when I was actually at DEF CON. It's a wonderful time. I hope you guys get to take a look at those. It's a fun time. And then references, which is the next slide, and the next slide. So if you have any, I want to go in, look at those, you can look at those. And a big shout out to my family and friends who have helped out with this. And thank you to all of you who have come to watch this talk. I thank you guys so much. And thank you. Really do appreciate it. And that's about it. See ya.
By the way, your meme game, strong, as A+. TriMark Vision is the next evolution in the identification of security issues across all your Active Directory environments. The TriMark Risk Score is based on real-world expertise of TriMark's industry-leading Active Directory and Microsoft Cloud security experts. Most importantly, TriMark Vision helps you to answer the questions facing your Active Directory security posture today, such as what risk do I have in my environment? What actionable steps can I take today, tomorrow, this week to best mitigate my risk of an attack on my Active Directory? What should I be most concerned about within my Active Directory forest where it concerns potential attack vectors? What is the current security posture of all my AD forests? TriMark Vision, visibility at the speed of operations.